You're more than welcome. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me back. I'm truly grateful for the opportunity to spend the weekend preparing another presentation for you. I have deliberately kept this short, not just to preserve what was left of my weekend, but I guess the whole point of having controversies is to get people to think and to generate some discussion. And whether I succeed in that endeavour, I guess we will see shortly. First things first, I have a confession to make. This isn't exactly the talk that I was asked to give, although you will note that I have kept the same title in an attempt to get away with it. In my defence, there are a couple of mitigations. Firstly, I've always struggled with doing what I'm told. I generally consider it to be an assault on my individuality, and as one of my kids would say, almost certainly a breach of my human rights. And secondly, my increasingly addled brain really struggled to come up with anything terribly interesting to say on this particular subject. Should consultant anaesthetists be more patient with surgical registrars? Absolutely yes. Although, if you had seen me a couple of weeks ago, literally beating my head against the wall in theatre as an E-bus I was anaesthetising ticked over into its 91st minute, you might question my right to preach patience. Anyway, should consultant surgeons take greater interest in and ownership of the less interesting parts of the operation? That's a yes from me too. However, and this won't be a revelation, we all know that you only learn from actually doing rather than observing. And crucially, all training essentially comes down to the requirement to balance the needs of the present with the needs of the future. To what extent we should tolerate or allow or even encourage minor complications at any given moment as a hedge against future brilliance has to be judged in the moment by the individuals, depending on a whole plethora of considerations. It would be interesting, I think, to see people's reactions if we started writing on consent forms. You may suffer some minor or moderate complications during this procedure so that your children will receive better medical care in the future. Maybe we can have a vote at the end as to whether we think this is a good idea or not. If you existed in my brain, all this musing, as in fact do most things, makes me immediately start thinking about sport. Mattison's rule of sport is that all sporting strategy comes down to clarity of thought and purpose in balancing attack and defence. Team sport has the aforementioned additional element, namely the competing interests of the present and the future. You can have a team of 19-year-olds who will be world beaters in 6 years' time, but lose many of their games along the way. Similarly, junior surgeons can do most of the operating. We will have a world-beating future workforce, but probably lose a number of patients along the way. In 11 days' time, one of the oldest and most revered contests in international team sport commences. The brave, plucky English against the pesky and morally dubious Australians, also known as the Ashes. It all started in 1882 when Fred the Demon Spofforth ripped through the English batters, almost certainly using some yet-to-be discovered form of cheating, taking 14 wickets in the match and inspiring the mock obituary which appeared in the Sporting Times the following day. In affectionate remembrance of English cricket, which died at the Oval on the 29th of August 1882, deeply lamented by a large circle of sorrowing friends and acquaintances, R.I.P. The body will be cremated and the ashes taken to Australia. Today, English cricketing hopes are cradled in the powerful yet tender hands of this man, Ben Stokes. He doesn't know it yet, but with a little help from me, he's about to become a pioneer of medical training. I want you to start by imagining that you have all been trained wrong. Perhaps not wrong per se, but let's say inadequately. You may just be starting to work this out, but I'm personally completely beguiled by team sport, the fragile and fascinating alchemy that brings together a group of individuals in a spirit of collective endeavour that, if done well, leads to spectacular success, and if done badly, can end in catastrophic failure. Given that sadly I cannot play cricket, I am destined to be reduced to the next best thing in team sport, namely cardiac surgery. I want to think aloud for a few minutes about what makes people successful in sport and see if it has any applicability to what we do at work. Everything we do relies on teamwork. But what does it really mean to be part of a team? Psychologists at the University of Southern California analysed data from over 30,000 Himalayan climbers. They found that teams from countries with more hierarchical cultures were significantly more likely to die in the mountains. But crucially, this was not the same for solo climbers from the same countries. It's not an issue, therefore, of competence. It's about something that happens when you get a group of individuals and ask them to work together. You will be shocked to discover that I love the Olympics. Either first or second every time in the medals table is China, one of the world's great sporting superpowers. Interestingly, the Olympics is dominated by individual sports, and you never really see China having any impact in the world's major team sports. Maybe it's just cultural, but maybe it's again something to do with authoritarian culture. By the way, for the record, I've got nothing against China, and if you're listening from the Chinese government, I think you're doing a terrific job. That said, effective team building recognizes the core principle that it is not possible to separate the performance of the individual from the performances of other members of the team. An effective team has good leadership, a strong and shared sense of strategy and objectives, the resources to deliver them, and clarity as to individual roles. Essentially a sports team in a nutshell, but also equally applicable to what we do. If this is the essence of team building, then teamship, a related but complementary element, is the glue that holds the team together. A sense of openness and creativity, a resistance to blame, and a culture that encourages development, adaptability, and renewal. Moving from team building to teamship requires motivation. Motivation is the process that initiates, guides, and maintains goal-orientated behaviors. In order to build a successful team and give your team the best chance of achieving your objectives, having every member of the team motivated to achieve the same thing is essential. The first known example of sports psychology as a science was by a guy named Norman Triplett of Indiana, who discovered in 1890 that people rode their bikes faster when they were with other people. In 2008, in the Beijing Olympics, Michael Phelps won 8 gold medals, beating the seemingly impregnable record of Mark Spitz. Gold number 8 came in the 4x100 meters freestyle relay. His teammate, Jason Lezak, swam the final leg and came from behind to beat the world record holder, and in doing so, swam a full 2 seconds faster than he had ever done before in his life. Such was the transformational power of being part of a team. A team culture is founded and built on the notion of shared values, beliefs, and goals, and is determined almost entirely by the behavior of its leaders. The respect we show to those around us, whether we offer praise and gratitude, whether we give or earn trust. James McGregor Burns, a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, said that transforming leadership occurs when one or more persons engage with others in such a way that leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of motivation and morality. This is JFK, you probably worked that out. Without doubt, a transformational and inspiring leader. Here he is giving the speech at Rice University in 1962 that inspired the space race. This is a small passage from the speech. I feel that we should probably read a paraphrased version of this at our team briefings each morning that essentially goes along the lines of, we choose to do this AVR, not because it is easy, but because it is difficult, because that goal will serve to organise and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, unless it's after 2 o'clock. Shortly after this speech, he visited NASA and supposedly encountered a member of the cleaning staff. He asked him what his role was, and the answer came back, "Sir, I am here to help put a man on the moon." Sadly, he didn't say it in a Mancunian accent. Given that we seem to be stuck in a never-ending loop of wave after wave of multi-drug resistant bacteria, you could argue that our cleaners are currently the most important member of our theatre team. If someone asked them what their role is, would they say, "I'm helping to fix people's hearts"? I'm not so sure. I would argue that's a failure of behaviour on our part, which ultimately comes down to a failure of training. All of us are clinical leaders, whether we like it or not. This is regardless of whether we have a formal position in the hierarchy. All of us has a responsibility to model the behaviours and values that lead to success. We should be teaching leadership almost above all other skills, in my opinion. In Bristol in 2017, Ben Stokes got into a fight outside a nightclub and was charged with a fray. It looked like his international, if not entire, career was over. 5 years later, he was made England captain. I don't know anything about American football. I actually have an irrational prejudice against all American sport, but I've heard of Tom Brady, the greatest ever quarterback and winner of 7 Super Bowl titles. In the NFL draft, he scraped through as pick 199 out of 200. He'd actually stopped watching because he thought his dream was over. He went from absolute despair to greatest of all time. Both these examples show incredible resilience. A resilient mind is one that can turn setbacks into positive opportunities. Resilience comes from the understanding that all of us who strive to achieve will experience disappointment or setbacks, but realizing that we are not the first to face adversity and that others have faced or overcome the same or worse provides strength and reassurance. Our jobs require huge reserves of physical, psychological, and emotional resilience, particularly in the post-COVID world in which we are all teetering on the edge of burnout and under greater scrutiny than ever before. Yet we never get taught resilience or coping strategies. Again, I would argue a failure of training. So what does it really mean to be trained, and are we getting our training right as a profession? I typed NHS scandal into Google this morning. The first 7 things that came up were infected blood scandal, 30,000 people affected, Bristol heart scandal, 35 deaths, Stafford hospital scandal, 1,200 deaths, Alderhay organ scandal, Shrewsbury and Telford maternity scandal, 200 avoidable deaths, East Kent maternity, 45 deaths, and Nottingham maternity, 2,500 cases currently under review. The objective evidence would suggest that we are getting something wrong with our training. I would argue that the distance of supervision is secondary to teaching these other skills: team building, strategizing, crisis management, resilience, and indeed many others, but above all else, leadership, which is the foundation for everything. If I had to summarize, I would call it mindset. The right mindset is not about possessing a particular skill or level of intelligence. It's about the attitude you take to a challenge and how you use and develop the qualities you have to maximum effect in meeting that challenge. Technical skills take you so far. Mindset is what comes into play through other qualities required for success: mental strength, determination, resilience, the ability to respond in the right way to failure, and the ability to handle pressure. It's understandable that we focus so much on the technical aspects of what we do. To perform cardiac surgery requires incredible technical skill. But think about being a batter in cricket for a second. If you're facing a fast bowler, you have approximately 0.2 seconds to process the flight and trajectory of the ball, then about 0.28 of a second to work out what shot you're going to play, and then about 0.1 of a second to swing the bat. The technical skill required to achieve this is off the charts, and whereas they, of course, spend a lot of time practicing the technical aspect, they consider mindset to be of equal, if not greater, importance. Dame Kelly Holmes, one of our greatest ever athletes, winner of 2 gold medals in Athens, believed that her running was 20% physical and 80% mental. In all seriousness, though, why am I so obsessed with sport? Is it just a manifestation of a midlife crisis? Well, almost certainly. But I can't escape the thought that what separates us from elite sports people is that we are trained, if not explicitly, then implicitly, that our end point is competence, in particular technical competence, whereas successful sports people are continually striving for excellence. We might believe on an individual basis that we are aiming for excellence, but the acceptance of adequacy has insidiously crept into our profession. The objective evidence is hard to argue with. On a personal note, my wife had an accident last week and went to A&E. It was a weekday morning in good weather. She waited for 10 hours without being properly assessed or treated and then gave up and went home. We have effectively institutionalized mediocrity, in many cases without even realizing it. We also have the pernicious nonsense in medicine that so-and-so might be that so-and-so might be an arsehole, but at least they can operate or anesthetize or whatever it is. Ben Stokes is hyper competent. He's also an alpha male with a big ego, but he also has incredible emotional intelligence and has created an atmosphere around him that allows people to thrive and that people are desperate to be a part of. We shouldn't have to choose between competency and decency. The idea itself is a failure. All of this, again, far more so than the proximity of our supervision, is a failure of medical training and medical thinking. Turn your back on mediocrity, strive for excellence, accept your role as a leader with all that that entails, and most importantly, retrain and reprogram your brain by embracing your inner sports star. And we can beat the Australians, or in our case, the cardiologists, together. Two final thoughts. As a result of doing this, I'm making a resolution that as well as asking trainees, what are you doing? What are you doing? I will also try and ask them, what are you thinking? And finally, this from Eddie Rama, one of the world's most successful politicians, having won, I think, 4 consecutive democratic elections in Albania, which I suspect is not an easy feat. Before he went into politics, he was a professional basketball player. He said this about playing basketball, but it seems to me a pretty good summary of the essence of training. In sport, managers and coaches often talk of the dream teams being a mix of energetic younger and wiser older players. And the same goes for politics, or in our case, medicine. You need experienced people around you, but you also need innovators, people with ideas and energy, huge enthusiasm and the beliefs of idealism. The old, that's me sadly, must support and inspire the young, but they must also let the young express themselves. Basketball also taught me that the more secure you are and the more confident in your own skills, the more you can become a leader, free from the fear that you are fighting to stay and enjoying the lights of the scene as you enter the arena or operating theatre. Once that feeling comes, the more you are able to empower the others and share your winning ways with them. And just to prove that I put my money where my mouth is, here is a photo of me team building on Halloween. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. Appreciate your willingness to take on this topic and to stick to the lack of brief as appropriately as you have. The aim of all these talks today is to try and encourage some kind of discussion from people in the audience. If we have people that are willing to unmute themselves and chip in, please do. One thing I was going to talk about was, how much do you think we should be using things like the team brief, as you said, to really kind of benchmark what is the team goal? Because, I mean, I've certainly been in some theatres where it feels like the goal of the goals amongst the team are not particularly aligned in terms of some people are keen to get home early, some people are keen to do a complex case for the first time, and other people are just therefore kind of the routine humdrumness of their working life. Does anybody, do you have any thoughts about kind of setting, being aligned with the goals of the team sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it's kind of self-evident that you need kind of clarity of purpose and everyone needs to be pulling in the same direction. I would argue probably almost more importantly that using the team brief to model behaviours is probably even more vital to the kind of successful accomplishment of what you're trying to achieve.
And the other thing that I always kind of wonder about kind of training in cardiothoracics is the continuity element. So the surgeons have obviously a really good paradigm for continuity in that, you know, a fellow or a registrar will be tied to the hip to that particular surgeon for 6 months to a year, sometimes multiple years. Whereas in the anaesthetic community, we might see a trainee once and then never again, depending on where you work and what sort of lists you do. Um, and how we can integrate a good kind of working relationship to a very fleeting interaction. For example, whether or not seeing the letters on somebody's badge, whether that's enough to instill a level of trust and competence in a particular trainee, as opposed to the way the surgeons have it, where they will have, months to assess somebody's competence.
Yeah, I guess there's kind of pluses and minuses, aren't there? I mean, I think it's good to train with a kind of variety of people, to learn a kind of variety of different ways of doing things, a variety of different attitudes, see kind of different sorts of behaviors, take the kind of, kind of shy away from the bad, kind of take the good. And I think you're more likely to get a kind of more rounded sort of sense if you experience multiple people. I think that there's definitely a balance. I mean, I guess I'm sure as in common with most institutions, all of our trainees will have clinical supervisors that are, that even if you don't necessarily work with them every day, you're a kind of point of continuity and kind of mentorship, I guess. But then allied to, getting a kind of good variety of experiences, I think is probably the way forward, I think.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any kind of comments or about how kind of training is managed in their own institution for good or bad? Um, Otherwise, we'll hopefully warm up to the conversation later in the meeting. Uh, no,
Maybe it's the weather that's putting people off.
sorry.
Maybe it's the weather putting people off. It's quite miserable
Yeah,
outside.
I think so. It
Yeah.
is.
Paul,
It
can I just
also
make a
be.
comment?
Of course.
Working as I do in a hospital where we've got the military embedded with us, it's very, very striking that if you have a career as an officer in the army for 25 years and you go from second lieutenant to general, you'll spend nearly a quarter of that in institutions like Sandhurst being taught leadership skills and so on. So yeah, someone who's reached brigadier or above in the army will effectively have the military equivalent of an MBA at the very least, and will spend a large chunk of their the army will invest a large chunk of their total career time in that individual in actually providing them training for the skills they need at the various levels that they've performed at. And I do wonder whether actually what we lack is some structure akin to a staff college where we can take people not entirely out of clinical environments, but to actually equip them with the skills that they need, particularly for things like the management hierarchy and so forth. And I guess my question to Simon is, obviously we're not going to build an anaesthetic Sandhurst for postgraduate leadership in the next few weeks, but what are the things that what would be the sort of big wins that we could do easily in theatre, do you think, to try and allow our current residents and fellows to take away a bit more in terms of leadership and resilience and the things you talked about?
Yeah, it's a great question, I think. So I think kind of one thing, I mean, it's slightly tangential to what you're saying, but I'm sure it's connected, is that I think generally speaking, when we do training in medicine, doctors go away and learn together, nurses go away and learn together, whatever, perfusionists go away and learn together. It's relatively unusual, at least in my experience, that we do whole team training, whatever it may be, kind of simulated crises or whatever it may be. And I think that's incredibly powerful for team building. We kind of ran a course for a while that got curtailed over COVID, and we haven't quite managed to reconstitute it, but it was a sort of human factors sort of simulation training day, and we had basically whole teams that would come down from different institutions. So a mixture of surgeons, anaesthetists, perfusionists, scrub nurses, ODPs. And we would do a mixture of, some of this sort of training, kind of communication and team working, and some of the other kind of human factors, kind of softer skills. But it was very much kind of targeted at the whole team. And I think that's something that we could definitely do better, because I think a lot of this comes down to the essence of kind of team working and leadership, and all those other things are kind of facets of that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. That